Excellencies, colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome. The United Nations University Center for Policy Research, the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform are so pleased to join CGIAR Focus Climate Security for their launch today of the Climate Security Observatory. We have a group of you here in Geneva in the room, and we have a large group of folks following along online. So a warm welcome to all of you wherever you are. My name is Annika Erickson-Pearson, and I am the Community Management Lead at the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform. I have the joy and the pleasure of managing a network community of practice of more than 600 individuals around the world working on issues related to environment, climate change, conflict, peace, conservation, security, kind of a whole plethora of different issues. And I'm really delighted to serve as your facilitator today. I know we're going to have some people coming in the room. I was reminded that here in Geneva, we tend to start 5 to 10 minutes late, but because we have an online audience, we're going to get started now. So today, we're here to dig a bit deeper into the complex relationship between climate change, security, peace, and human experience, really. And specifically, we're here to discuss a new tool in our toolbox, which is the Climate Security Observatory. We will really get into the details. We'll have a sort of robust discussion about how that tool works. But the reason you're all here is because we want to understand how the tool will work for you and what challenges you're facing in your work today. I want to stress the importance of your participation both in the room and online, as many of the folks you'll see presenting today are not necessarily from the areas that are hardest hit by climate change and conflict. So I just want to, for those of you online, we'll be really monitoring the chat, and I'd really encourage your participation to make sure we're getting your perspectives as well. So today we're going to hear some opening remarks, especially from our host here today, the GCSP. We have Ambassador Thomas Greminger here, and we also have some other partners that will be giving some opening remarks. We'll hope to have a short keynote speech from Ambassador Gamal Hassan from IGAD, but I'm not sure if he's online yet, so we'll see. And then we'll dive into that exploration of the observatory. So before we get started, and also to give a little bit more context to why we're here, I actually want to encourage you to turn to the person next to you. And if you've already been chatting to somebody next to you, maybe turn the opposite direction and find a new person. And just please introduce yourself. Share why you decided to come to this launch event today. And for the online audience, maybe if you want to type in the chat, introduce yourself and share where you're tuning in from, that'd be great. So let's just take 2 minutes, turn to the person next to you, and then we'll get started. All right, thank you. Oh, and wow, now we have a few more folks coming in. Welcome to those of you coming in the room. We have some seats in the front row as usual. That's always the last to be filled. I think there's also an open seat here, an open seat there. Welcome, warm welcome to all of you. So I think we'll now transition into hearing from our host, again, the GCSP, the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and some of the partners that brought this event. I want to kindly remind you three opening speakers to keep your remarks brief, and we'll continue to build on your expertise as we get into the second half of today's discussion. I think there's a seat up here, there's one in the middle, there's over there. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Thomas Greminger. He's the director of the GCSP. You may remember him as the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, where he served from July 2017 until July 2020. He's held a wide variety of leadership positions throughout the organization, as well as in the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. And perhaps most relevantly to today's discussion, he's really been a champion for the prioritization of climate security issues over time. So, Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Annika. And I'll be brief, you will see. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, dear friends, good morning. Welcome. On behalf of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, I'm delighted to welcome you to this launch of the Climate Security Observatory. First of all, I would like to thank you for taking the time despite of your busy schedules, to participate in this important discussion on how we can improve the link between data on climate security and the policy world. I would also like to thank our partners, the CGIAR, Focus Climate Security, the UNU Center for Policy Research, and the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform for this very timely initiative. For those who have not yet come across the GCSP, allow me to say just a couple of words about us and our approach, also to help illustrate why we are doing this. We were founded in 1995. We are an international foundation dedicated to promoting international peace and security. Our activities focus primarily on executive education, on offering informal space for inclusive dialogue. We call it diplomatic dialogue. We offer a platform for exchanging innovative ideas, and we provide policy advice. We are guided in our work by the principles of impartiality, independence, and inclusivity. In our comprehensive security approach, the GCSP recognizes climate change as an integral part of the peace and security landscape today, and in particular in the future. Indeed, we have been systematically including this issue in our various activities basically since 2000, and well before it became a standard part of any security analysis. Climate change impacts the weather, manifesting in stronger and more frequent disasters. It undermines the working of different systems such as food, energy, or supply chains. And finally, it contributes to political instability with increased population flows, challenged governance, or even contributing directly to conflict. Most people here in this room and all those joining online already know this. But there is a lack of solid, localized, and policy-relevant evidence on how climate security challenges manifest in different geographical contexts. Until now, climate change exacerbated water scarcity in the Middle East. It increased the intensity of floods in Southern Asia and Europe. It changed rain patterns and induced prolonged droughts in sub-Saharan Africa. This list is clearly not exhaustive, and the risks will become much longer in the future. For instance, as many of you might be aware, experts warn about the El Niño event returning in the second half of this year, when the equatorial Pacific Ocean heats up to 3 degrees Celsius. This is known as the El Niño event, or becomes colder. This is called La Niña than usual. The WMO defines both natural phenomena as, and I quote, major drivers of the Earth's climate system. Experts expect that El Niño will most likely result in a new spike in global heating, which will become evident next year in 2024. The impacts are manifold, with rising food insecurity being clearly the most predominant, particularly affecting Southern Africa, Central America, the Caribbean, and parts of Asia, but also triggering significant global repercussions. Today's launch of the CGIAR Climate Security Observatory is therefore a timely and a very crucial endeavor to reduce the risk of climate-driven insecurity. As such, it aims to provide concrete evidence that will allow for more precise decision-making now and for the future. As somebody who has been involved in peace and security policies my entire career, I do particularly applaud its ambition to create and maintain climate resilient peace. Switzerland has just become chair of the UN Security Council at the beginning of this month, and one of the Swiss priorities is indeed climate security. And I'm confident that the evidence offered by the CSO will provide the necessary arguments for our conversations within the Council to work with our partners on addressing climate security challenges in different parts of the globe. On this note, I'm very keen to discover more about this excellent initiative and engage in today's discussion on climate security. With these words, I wish you all fruitful discussion during the event today. And thank you, and back to you, Annika.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Yes. Thank you so much. Again, just a big thank you to the GCSP for hosting having such a sort of robust technological footprint for this launch would not be possible, but also the support that we've received from Anna and Alicia is just incredible. So thank you both so much. I'm happy to turn over now to Adam Day. He is the head of the Geneva office of the UN University Center for Policy Research. He arrived in Geneva almost 1 year ago, and it seems like you've been here a lifetime. You oversee programming on multitude or various different topics: peace building, human rights, peacekeeping, sanctions, climate security, etc. So without much further ado, I turn over to you.
I don't have one of these cool headsets like Ambassador Greminger, but this works. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Annika, and thanks to the GCSP. We've hosted so many things together already in this first year. It's great to be with you again, and great to be with CGIAR, who we have a partnership with as well. With UN University, we've been looking at the issue of climate security for about 5 years, including advising Security Council members during their tenure on the Council. And one of the things I've noticed over the last 5 years is obviously the empirical basis for climate security has gotten a lot stronger and better connected, but there's still a problem with it, or maybe two problems with it. One is that it tends to be issue specific. So you'll have someone who's very good at understanding coral bleaching and the effect on fishing communities, or someone who's very good at understanding water scarcity and farmer-herder conflicts, but it tends to stay in those particular issues. And the second issue is it tends to stay at the analytic level. A huge amount of research has gone into things. The climate security mechanism has done great analysis, building up analytic capacities, but there's often a missing link between that and action by people on the ground, although that's improving. And I think those two problems are exactly what the CSO is meant to solve, I hope. And one is it's meant to move from just analytic to involving local actors into what they should be doing and offering pathways for action. And the second thing is to take climate security out of these silos and to think in complex systems terms. And that means that you're not just looking at coral bleaching, but you're looking at the socio-political landscape and saying, how does this issue affect that broader complex landscape? And looking at particular effects on women in certain communities and taking these other lenses. Almost every climate security paper that I've written over the last 5 years has had some recommendation at the end that you have to have a multi-scalar approach. You have to be able to go from the global to the regional to the local and back up again. And I think the CSO is meant to do a lot of that and really connect the data to those actors. And I was talking to Grazia, where's Grazia, this morning, and I said, what is the CSO meant to do? And she reduced it down to, I think, 4 or 5 words. And she said, transform climate adaptation, it's more than 5 words, transform climate adaptation into an instrument of peace. And I really feel like that's a great encapsulation of taking this large-scale response that we're going to see around the world and adding that peace layer. And I'm really looking forward to also hearing from Andrew Harper at the end of this, who's trying to do that, has tried to do that in the Sahel, is trying to do that in IGAD, and really getting into the practical use of the CSO is what I'm most excited about today. So, really grateful to be part of this conversation. Really always happy to participate in anything Annika is moderating, and looking forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers.
Thanks, Adam. I'm happy now to go to Dr. Ana Maria Lobo Guerrero, who is the Research Director of Climate Action at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT-CGIAR. I'm reading this out because I do think it is quite entertaining for those of you following along at home, the volume of acronyms that we use in this city. But very seriously, Ana Maria has more than 14 years of experience working on climate change challenges, and we're so grateful to have you here in Geneva. Over to you.
Thank you for hosting us, for inviting us to come here. Ambassador Dr. Day, thank you very much for attending, for making the time to be here with us. It is very exciting to be here today. This is a huge milestone for the work that the CGIAR has been doing for the past years in relation to climate security. So, very exciting day for us in terms of launching the Climate Security Observatory. I speak also for many of the CGIAR initiatives. We have a portfolio of initiatives that are working to transform food, land, and water systems under a climate crisis. One of those, which is very close to my heart, is an initiative on building systemic resilience against climate. And the idea of this initiative is to really address the root causes of vulnerability. And we believe that the Climate Security Observatory is a tool that is going to help a lot, not only the CGIAR, but many partners around the world that are very involved in policy-making processes to really understand those root causes of vulnerability, and through that, being able to promote and implement adaptation options that can really benefit millions of stakeholders around the world. So let me start by emphasizing that food insecurity and conflict are very much aligned, very, very related. They go hand in hand. We all know that. So very important to realize that when food systems fail and people fear hunger, then conflict follows. And when conflict occurs, food systems are threatened and people go hungry. But if we add a third variable to this equation, then this becomes more complex. And this variable is climate change. When we add climate change to this nexus, then the temperature is raised not only in the thermometers, but also the likelihood of conflict and the consequences of conflict intensify. So just put this in very, very simple words. Peace should be climate resilient, and under many circumstances, conflict worsens climate change. The CGIAR has been working for many, many years in addressing climate change challenges for food, water, and land systems. And based on this work, based on this experience, we are very confident to say that we can contribute to peace building by providing the right tools, such as the Climate Security Observatory, to formulate and implement climate-smart policies. If food systems are reinforced against climate change threats, then the danger of failed food systems is mitigated, and so a potential spur of conflict is blunted. We are observing and experiencing many, many issues, emerging security issues around the world. Just think about the Sahel, and think how in Africa, farmer herders and pastoralists are competing for climate-threatening land and water. We believe that this can be eased through these climate-smart policies, and we have evidence that this can help. And this is where the Climate Security Observatory becomes really, really relevant in terms of recognizing these connections. At the heart of the Climate Security Observatory, it's the understanding that we need quality data, and also we need qualitative and quantitative evidence in order to develop these climate-smart policies, and many other mechanisms through which climate-related conflict can be avoided. The Climate Security Observatory, it's already becoming this engine, and it was already discussed for the assembly of different types of information. It certainly, and this is the vision, will address the lack of available data sources and analytical tools necessary to really understand this complex relationship between three main variables. Variables in relation to climate, in relation to socio-economic vulnerabilities and in relation to conflict. The idea of the Climate Security Observatory is to help to inform relevant policy debates by underpinning those debates with scientific research, which is what we do at the CGIAR. The Climate Security Observatory is already becoming a platform through which many streams of research that are currently scattered across scientific disciplines, different scientific disciplines, sometimes it was mentioned working under silos, but the Climate Security Observatory will help to consolidate this information in a way that brings clarity to decision makers. Something that I would like to emphasize a lot is that this Climate Security Observatory is not at all a CGIAR tool. We don't perceive this tool as ours. On the contrary, this tool has been built with the heavy involvement of its users, because otherwise it is never going to be able to be successful. And these users are people in position to make decisions that shape policy in relation to reducing these conflicts. The vision for us is that when the data and analyses that will be provided through the Climate Security Observatory are out there, it will be very easy and natural for policymakers to use it. This is what we want to see happening. We want the Climate Security Observatory to become a tool to feed scientific evidence into the decision-making processes on a daily basis of many people. We really see tons of potential for policymakers to getting involved in these kind of science-based platforms, such as the Climate Security Observatory. And then to take this, what they learn from interacting with this tool and using it to achieve outcomes and to improve the livelihoods of millions around the world through the implementation of policies. Let me just finish by saying that what we aim at the CGIAR, and this is very much on our research and innovation strategy that goes all the way into the 2030, we're aiming for a systems transformation for food, land, and water systems. While we work, we generate scientific evidence on what needs to happen to promote this transformation. We believe that we are at the same time able to reduce threats to health, economic equality, social stability, and food. We believe that success in doing this will contribute to peace, and we are sure that the Climate Security Observatory will help us to achieve this peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ana Maria. It's really exciting, and we're going to get into a presentation that really kind of goes into the ins and outs of the observatory. But first, I'm actually really happy to turn it over. It sounds like we do have Ambassador Gamal Hassan on the line. He is the head of Intergovernmental Authority on Development, EGAD's Center for Climate Adaptation and Environmental Protection. And Ambassador, I was recently supporting a policy consultation on the new agenda for peace here in Geneva, and I heard EGAD's work on regional adaptation planning raised multiple times as a best practice or model for responding to climate change. So we're fans of you over here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Can we try to connect to you now? The floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here today to join you and give a few remarks about the important subject that we're discussing today. First of all, I would like to congratulate the CGIAR for the launch of the Climate Observatory Security. This is Security Observatory. This is really good, a huge positive step forward. And also like to thank the host, the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Thank you very much for providing the platform and hosting all of us. To talk about a little bit about the IGAD region. The region, as you all know, is located in the Horn of Africa, in the East Africa in general, and has a population of over 260 million. And nearly 70% of the region is considered arid and semi-arid lands. It's also a water-scarce region. So that tells you something about the condition on the ground. So the rain-fed agriculture and livestock, the backbone of the economies here in member states, and it makes the region very vulnerable to climate change and variability. Just to give you a little background, in the last 3 decades, we have witnessed increased climate-related shocks, especially droughts, floods, cyclones, and storms, as well as the desert flux devastation in recent years. From 1997-98, El Nino floods happened in this region. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, thousands were killed, millions of livestock were destroyed, homes, infrastructure, you name it. Then 2011 drought, that's almost after a decade, in the Horn of Africa, killed hundreds of thousands of people in Somalia, and same amount of people migrated or got displaced and moved to Ethiopia and Kenya. And a decade later, we're here again, 2023, and we're seeing witnessing the same problems, subsequent droughts, intermittent floods, nearly every year. So the region is suffering from this cyclical back-to-back climate-induced crisis. So in 2020, 2021, we have witnessed the combined impacts of COVID-19, which compounded the problem, soaring energy and food prices due to the Russia-Ukraine war, coupled with the effects of climate change-related drought again, that saw 4 consecutive failed rainy seasons, impacting more than 42 million across southern Ethiopia, northern Kenya, and most parts of Somalia. Again, the year 2022 and this year 2023, we see the situation getting dire, with the 5th consecutive failed rainy season, putting parts of the IGAD region on the brink of famine. And according to the IGAD Regional Focus of the Global Report of Food Crisis 2023, out of the 258 million people facing the highest levels of acute food insecurity in 2022, 56.85 million people, or 22% of the analyzed population, were in the 8 food crisis countries in East Africa. So I'm just giving you these numbers to put it into context. The situation we're dealing with, the geography, the nature of the land, climate, all that put together. So you have a very serious issue there. So give you a couple of days ago, I had a meeting with the leadership of the Somali Disaster Management Agency, and they were telling me situations where you have families who were displaced by the droughts last year, moved to new localities and got displaced by Shabab. And then again, a few weeks ago, they were displaced by the flooding. The same families, the same communities, for the 3rd time in a row within 12 months. And given the projections we're hearing from the experts, next year, most likely we're going to see the same drought and same problems coming back, unless we do something about it, or at least help prepare people build the resilience. So therefore, the climate crisis is threatening the peace and prosperity of the region by heightening existing tensions within and outside individual member states. So when these communities move from one location to another community that's already feeling the same issues, face crisis of drought, their coping mechanisms getting weakened by every year, by the droughts that happen every year, there is a possibility for conflict. And as you know, social scientists theorize that climate change is a conflict multiplier. It is indeed. We have seen that. We have done the research. It is a conflict multiplier. For the millions of people in the IGAD region, however, the relationship is not theoretical, with climate change exacerbating political, social, economic, and geographic conditions which remain unfavorable. So this region, most communities in this region live with these realities on a daily basis. In November 2022, IGAD, in partnership with the UN Office of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Horn of Africa, published the first report on the state of climate, peace, and security in the Horn of Africa, indicating the threats climate change poses to peace and prosperity in the region. Then IGAD, our center here, and CGIAR, Climate Security Impact Pathways Analysis, an ongoing research in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan, as well as other relevant published work, has shown how climate change exacerbates conflicts in every angle you look at. And the two main impact pathways are one, resource availability and access, and the second one is livelihood and food security. And within those two, you have communities basically fighting over access of resources, fighting basically, since their mainstays, trade, fed, agriculture, and livestock production, losing one of them creates tensions. So both are very vulnerable to climate change, and loss of livelihood increases poverty, migration, and displacement. So the high number of vulnerable populations from one climate shock to the pressure of another climate shock increase the pressure on member states and international partners to provide humanitarian support, which is not sustainable in the long run, as you all know. So again, it's coming back to building the resilience, working, making sure that we help with early warning system, climate security, make them understand the linkage, and supporting those communities adapt to these realities. On November 30th, 2022, the IGAD Council of Ministers met in Khartoum and decided to establish the Regional Climate Security Coordination Mechanism that will help the capacity of IGAD member states to anticipate, prevent, and mitigate the outset of climate-induced conflict and displacement. This happened as a result of many reports and stories coming out from member states, all related to climate-induced conflict in one way or the other. So the foreign ministers met, and there was a communique issued on the 8th ordinary session of the Council of Ministers. Now IGAD is currently implementing the climate security mechanism. So this is a daily battle for the people in this region and for all of us. In line with this, IGAD Center for Climate Adaptation and Environmental Protection is currently developing a regional adaptation strategy that embeds climate security context to resilience so that climate change undermines peace and security. All this progress made towards IGAD Regional Strategy 2021, or the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Agenda 2063, just to make sure that we adapt to this strategy, to this situation. We're putting together a strategy for the whole region. And finally, to strengthen the response, IGAD is building on its comparative advantage and making the best use of its convening power across climate, peace, and security to coordinate and move together with all our partners in support of our member states. So we deal with the issues I mentioned above, which we can go into detail one by one. It will take days to actually cover all these topics. So that's what we're doing here on the ground. I'm really happy to see that Andrew Harper is going to be there as well. He was with us recently in the region and seen that firsthand, visiting some of the climate displaced communities in parts of Somalia and Kenya. So I'll be happy to listen to Andrew's remarks as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you for your time, listeners. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you so much. It's really helpful to kind of sit and ground this context. We know that the relationship between climate change, conflict, and peace is inherently complex. And I think one thing we're increasingly trying to recognize and work with here in Geneva, as we've heard from so many of you who are following online. I see we now have 137 folks following online. So many of you who are living in places affected by conflict and climate change have shared so concretely that that complex problems require collaborative and multi-stakeholder approaches. And that's exactly what you've just described, Ambassador. I know that life experiences are simply just not siloed into separate boxes. And so I appreciate all of the speakers we've had so far really modeling what that sort of collaborative approach can look like. we can now turn to diving into the CSO. Without further ado, I know we've been here for more than 30 minutes, and it's now time to really sort of unveil and discuss and dig into the Climate Security Observatory. I'm so glad to introduce Dr. Theresa Leivig, who's the Associate Scientist at CGIAR and lead of the Observatory project. She's an agricultural systems scientist with more than 10 years of experience in tropical agroecosystems in Central America and East Africa. Maybe if we can try to keep it to maybe 15 minutes, then we'll keep digging in over the course of the discussion so we can make sure we get some questions and comments from the audience as well. Would you like the, you're going to use that?
Yeah, welcome everyone also from my side. We are very, very exciting today. Myself and our team, so this is the first time that we present our observatory to the public. So thanks everyone for being here, both virtually and personally as well. So yeah, what is the CSO? The CSO is an online dashboard as a decision support tool for addressing a range of different actors working in the intersection of climate and conflict to understand and respond to climate security related risks. We provide national and subnational climate security related analysis with the ultimate goal to mitigate climate security risks and hopefully also contribute to climate resilient peace. Throughout our observatory, we have 4 lead questions. How does climate worsen the root causes of conflict? Where are the most vulnerable areas to climate-induced insecurities and risks? Who are the vulnerable groups to climate insecurity that need to be targeted? And what needs to be done to break the vicious cycle between climate and conflict? So you might now ask yourself why there's a need for yet another platform. So different platforms on similar topics might seem very similar at first sight, but actually if you look into it, they differ in different aspects. First of all, their thematic focus, but then also the target audience and with that accessibility to the platform, but then mainly in the methodological approaches. So it has been mentioned already before by previous speakers that there's a lack of evidence at different geographic levels. So there have been a lot of studies done research on climate security, but most of the studies focus on a specific country or specific area. So that's the first gap that we're trying to fill. Secondly, that was also mentioned already by Adam, I believe, there's a need for an integrated systems approach. So what we found in latest meta-studies in climate security is that we really need to try understand the nexus with different methods and from different perspectives. And most of the studies in the past have been relying on an individual, either qualitative or quantitative approach. And lastly, also the way how scientific knowledge is translated or made policy relevant is also an issue. So in the past, often policy debates around climate security have been misaligned with what is said in research. So the way how the community in climate security interacts with scientific knowledge also needs to evolve. So these are the gaps that we are trying to fill with the CSO. Some few words on our approach. So what we really try to do with the CSO is to create a multidisciplinary platform, and that applies both at the data and methods level. So we're using a diverse set of data sources, both qualitative and also quantitative. And we are also using a set of different traditional and innovative methods. Then also at the user interface level, we try to find ways of visualization of the results that speak to a broad audience. And then we try to bring all these different data streams together to form a more comprehensive picture of the climate security nexus. Okay, so without further words, I will jump right into it. So this is the landing page of the observatory. We have again here our 4 lead questions. How does climate worsen the root causes of conflict? Where are the most vulnerable areas to climate-induced insecurities and risks? Who are the vulnerable groups that need to be targeted? And what needs to be done to break the vicious cycle? From the landing page, we can go into the homepage from where we can access the country-specific analyses. Just before I go here, we have a set of social media tools on the homepage on the right-hand side We have a Twitter feed extracting all Twitter conversations that carry the hashtag climate security. And we have here on the left side, the Climate Security Dialogues dashboard. This is a dashboard that monitors Twitter conversations and soon also news media content over time. So here we have information on people that talk about climate security, geographical locations, organizations, as well as all kinds of terms that are related to climate security. So this dashboard that was already launched last year at the Berlin Climate Security Conference. Now going into the country-specific analysis, we are going to use Kenya as an example. So for each country, we have here our 4 lead questions. So that means that the questions are answered separately for each country with a set of different analyses. We also have a contextual tab. So this is basically to give an entry point for users into the context of a country, gives them insights into the climatic trends and historical, the data on historical conflicts, as well as a set of global indicators around climate security. So here you can look into different existing indicators around conflict, around inequality, around climate vulnerability, and you can go through these different indicators and look how they evolve over time. So this section is purely based on existing information from other institutions, and yeah, as that serves as an entry point. Now going into the how question, so how does climate worsen the root causes of conflict? Here we present 4 different analyses, 2 qualitative analyses and 2 quantitative analyses. The first qualitative analysis, community voices, hearing from those affected, is based on a participatory action research. And the idea here is that affected communities themselves establish so-called climate security pathways. So a description of how climate might act as a threat multiplier. In the case of Kenya, we worked in 3 different locations. And here you can see the summary of these established pathways. And including this kind of data on our platform speaks to the general criticism in climate security research on not sufficiently including local voices and data from local communities. The data from this analysis also feeds into the next qualitative analysis, the climate security pathway analysis. And Ambassador Jamal has just mentioned this analysis. So basically here the idea is also in a qualitative way to establish climate security pathways based on extensive literature review, both qualitative and quantitative, gray and scientific knowledges, which is then triangulated with information from the field, what I just described, as well as knowledge from expert workshops. And the results here are presented in a systems map. So basically what we can see here are the different pathways which can be displayed individually or in combination. And we can go through all these linkages, click on the variables and get descriptions for these variables along with an information with which other variables they're related to directly. We can also click on the connections and get interpretations for these specific linkages. And like this, you can click your way through to get an image of the underlying structure of the system. And you can see nicely here in this example that there's never a direct link between climate change and variability and conflicts, but that it's rather a network of indirect relationships that form this complex nexus. The next analysis is quantitative on underlying structures of the climate security nexus. So also this analysis is looking at the global interrelationships between climate security variables, but then in a quantitative way. So this analysis is based on network analysis. And what you can see here is a set of different variables related to the different climate security dimensions. And each of these connections describe partial correlations. And what is interesting to see in this network graphs is the positioning of the nodes within the network. Are they all clustered together from one dimension, or can we find variables that pertain to one dimension that is clustered or positioned in close proximity of another dimension like this one here. So that then gives an indication towards the underlying structure of the system. What we can also get from this analysis is a list of the most important socioeconomic variables that relate to conflict. The last analysis, also quantitative, is now not looking anymore at the global linkages, but specifically at the links between climate and conflict via highly localized food security and food prices. So the results are presented in a similar way as the pathway analysis. We have here our different models that can be selected in the drop-down menu, and each different model uses a different set of input variables. So climate variables on temperature or rainfall anomalies that are related to different variables on malnutrition and food security, as well as conflict, with different preceding time intervals. And similarly, like in the systems map before, you can click your way through, look at the descriptions and interpretations of the different linkages that were found, along with the statistical parameters as well. So this is the how question. For the where question, so where are the most vulnerable areas to climate-induced insecurities and risks? This is based on a spatial hotspot mapping, with the idea to find areas where we have co-occurring conditions of different climate, conflict, and socioeconomic vulnerabilities conditions. So the multicolored grid here show the different combinations of climate and conflict. We can select in the filtering, for example, areas that expose high conflict in combination with those that expose high levels of drought and stress, and can then zoom into these so-called megapixels. These have a resolution of 20 square kilometer, and get more detailed information on the underlying data, both the administrative area of this area, as well as all the individual input data that were used to create those conflict and climate clusters. So for each of these clusterings, we use 6 different input variables, which are described in detail here, along with an indication as well on the socioeconomic hotspots. So in this case, this area was a hotspot for undernutrition and inequality. The who question, who are the vulnerable groups that need to be targeted? So this is also based on the same spatial hotspot mapping, with the idea to dig into the community profiles of people living in these areas. So going into the same hotspot that I was just highlighting now, we can get here a set of different demographic and socioeconomic variables to characterize the communities living in these areas. And if you remember, this was an undernutrition and inequality hotspot. So if we look, for example, at variables like education for males and female, we can see that in this area, the averages are much lower than the national averages. And the same is true for wasting as an indicator for undernutrition. We have a much higher percentage in this area than the national average. And then, of course, there's many other variables that can also be explored to describe those community profiles. And then coming to the what question. So what needs to be done to break the vicious cycle between climate and conflict? So here we present different entry points for climate security sensitive programming and decision making. We have different solution spaces. The first solution space is on identifying and addressing policy gaps. Under this solution space, we have again 3 different approaches. The first one being the social media analysis. So the social media analysis monitors Twitter conversation of national policy actors over time, with the idea of exploring when and how much actors talk about climate security on Twitter. So there's many variables that can be selected. The second analysis, and this is something that is not implemented yet on the platform, is an in-depth policy coherence analysis. The idea here is to link or to assess to what extent policies around climate and conflict are coherent. So this is something that we will implement, as said, in the course of this year. And then the last approach under the Identify and Address Policy Gaps theme is policy and programmatic recommendations. So these are recommendations that come again directly from the different countries. In this case, they were established during expert workshops in Kenya. And here we're presenting the high-level summaries on different sections on multi-level governance, policy frameworks, programmatic planning, research and evidence gaps, as well as finance. We also have a full common vision report that was established together with those local experts, which is also available from the platform. The next solution space is on designing peace-responsive climate action programs. So this is a standalone tool that will also be launched in the course of this year. It's called the Climate Security Sensitivity Scoring Tool, and it aims at practitioners that are planning an interventional project around climate action to assess to what extent their planned intervention is climate security sensitive. So it's a two-step process. In the first step, the user can identify the area where the project is planned, and contextual drivers are established for this area, which are then mapped to so-called environmental peace-building mechanisms to identify what mechanisms should be targeted in that specific context. And then the second step, the user scores for each environmental mechanism and sub-mechanism to what extent their planned intervention contributes or not. The final output is then mapped together, step 1 and 2. So those mechanisms that should be targeted depending on the context versus the ones that are actually targeted in the planned project to identify depths and needs for improvement. The next approach under this theme is to foster inclusive participatory research, and that directly relates to the pathways that were established from communities in the field, what I just presented before. So during the same fieldwork activity where these pathways were established, the affected communities themselves also established solutions to these climate security risks. So this is also presented under the solution space. And then the last solution area, and this is also something that we will still implement this year, is to establish a database for actor and interventions. So an actor and intervention mapping to help users interact with different actors at different levels from local to national and international scale, which then should also help for planning and programming. All right, so. All right, yeah. So I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the team. Just 1 minute. The team that is behind the CSO. Without them, this would have not been possible. First of all, the analysis team, we have quite many. Oops, no, the subtitles are on. Then we have a management team as well as the platform development, so the engineers and the front-end engineers and designers, as well as several collaborators that had helped on the way. And lastly, I would also like to thank a couple of organizations that had helped us in shaping the observatory during user workshops. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and congratulations to you and to the whole team. As we can see, it really takes a village to pull this together. So just really a hearty congratulations. Let's please applaud again on launching this. So I mentioned we already have a couple. Evan, our colleague here, is feeding me some questions from the chat, and it seems like we already have some questions there, and I want to hear from you in the room as well. But before we do that, I actually want to invite you all into a sort of a minute of pause. You have now been sort of sitting and receiving information for about an hour. There's a lot that we just went through. And I actually just want to invite you for about 1 minute to just reflect on what you've heard. Are there ways that you can already imagine using the CSO, the Climate Security Observatory? What has worked for you in the past in terms of sort of translating science into policy? What's relevant to your experience? Are pieces of this that stand out to you and what's not? So again, I'll just please take a minute or two to reflect, and then we'll jump right into the discussion. Great. I'm happy to open the conversation and sort of space for discussion here. First, perhaps just giving space to member states and their representatives. If any of you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make, please go ahead and raise your hand and introduce yourself as you take the floor. Any questions first? Not to put you on the spot, I just wanted to make sure you had that space as well. Okay, well, if anything does come up, then please, please.
Thank you, and I'll test the very sensitive mic. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm Lena Esklund from the Norwegian mission, and first of all, congratulations. This looks very, very interesting, and I look forward to looking at it. I'm assuming the page is live and can be looked at soon. My questions are, I have two questions. One, this seems to be a very interesting snapshot of the situation now, but it'd be interesting to hear what your plans are to maintain it, to make sure that it will continue to be useful for the coming years. And two, we were talking about working in silos and not working in silos. How do you plan to cooperate with relevant Geneva actors, UNDRR, WMO's the Center of Excellence? There's a number of organizations here in Geneva. How do you plan to involve them in this? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in this round before we go over? So that actually builds on, there was a question in the chat, how often is the CSO data updated, considering that some of the qualitative data is most likely survey data, which is cross-sectional. So why don't I, and by the way, we also have Gracia Paccio here up on the stage from the CGIAR team, and all three of them will sort of be your expert panel. And if maybe for each response we can keep to one of you responding so that we can churn through more questions. I already have more here. Please go ahead. You don't need the mic. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe I do the first question. So on sustainability and also updating. So one way as in the midterm and long-term plan for the CSOs is to involve the different countries themselves, and that was also the plan from the beginning. It's a bit of a technical challenge, but the idea was that the different countries would manage themselves, the CSO, and at some point also be able to run the analysis themselves. Because as Anna Maria said before, we don't want to own it. This is the first version, and we will continue engaging with users because it's very difficult to find to meet the requirements for each different user from different countries, different contexts. And we've been running user workshops to understand what their needs are, but we need to do much more. So this is the first version, and the future versions will then include more components, different countries, maybe different data sets. So that is also useful for the different users that we're creating this tool for. In terms of data update, it depends on the analysis itself. Some are real time. The social media analysis, for example, this is just sourced all the time from Twitter data. Other analysis, we have to decide what is a useful time frame, and that's also something that we try to establish with users. For example, the spatial analysis and the different climate variables, depending on the topic as well. If it's for livestock, then probably it's more seasonal data that is relevant. So it depends a bit on the topic, but we were planning for maybe once or twice a year for the spatial analysis. And then for the qualitative data, that depends on data availability. So some of the data we are creating ourselves. So for example, the ones from the field, but this is, I don't know at this point if we're planning to repeat this exercise, but data that are used, for example, for the modeling that come from surveys, there we depend on the update frequency of the data sources that we are using.
And then there was the question about sort of working together with the sort of Geneva ecosystem and some of the other institutions here.
Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Grazia Pacillo. I'm the senior scientist at CGIAR and co-lead of the CGIAR focused climate security team. So very, very nice to meet you all, and thank you again for coming. So yes, the point of this CSO is that, as Anna Maria said, we don't want it to be a CGIAR tool. This is the point of departure, but we want to be as inclusive as possible because, as we know, the climate security nexus doesn't mean anything if there is only data-driven analysis or if there is only one voice driving the conversation. It has to be a multiple dimension, multiple stakeholder type of discourse. So we started this journey together, that there will be more and more of these activities and engagements that we would like to do, not only with the Geneva actors, but globally in the entire climate security space. And in fact, we are planning a series of user training or / workshops that will follow this launch, and then potentially other launches in different continents, in different geographical areas, to make sure that we reach out to those actors that are interested, but that could also benefit from this evidence. And another layer, another aspect of this is that there is a possibility to tailor the different type of evidence and analysis that we do to the need of the different policymakers. This is what we have been trying to do at country level, directly with the governments, and through the workshop and engagement that we've done at regional, national, and local level, to make sure that the research is entirely demand-driven, that whatever we offer is based on the needs of the country and the region. And these refers primarily to those countries where we are working on, the regions where we're working on, but also to those actors and policymakers that act at global and regional level. So I really welcome any feedback, any interaction from your side as well, to understand better what the research needs are, what are the evidence needs that could inform the operations of countries, member states, and organizations such as yours.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm happy to open the floor to others, and that's including the online chat. I already have a couple of questions here, and I just want to name, again, folks following us virtually, please do type your questions in there. Feel free to pose a question in French, and I'll try to do a rough translation into English. My Spanish is bad, but we can figure it out if you want to pose a question in Spanish. But I'm also happy to open the floor here. Are there any questions or comments in the room? Again, sort of questions on the functionality of the tool, but also maybe comments already on how you are translating sort of science into policy, or how you might see yourself using this tool. Yeah, please. And introduce yourself as you take the floor. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Fleur Hayworth, and I work on gender and inclusive security, and I'm also managing the International Gender Champions Secretariat. There's a lot of interest from leaders within Geneva and more broadly to close the gender climate gap, to really see gender equality as a tool, a lever for accelerating more sustainable climate action. I'm really curious about your policy platform, about identifying where the policy gaps are and how those gaps can be closed. And I see that as quite a big sphere of influence here in Geneva as to how can we work on more effective policies. And I'm just curious about how far that analysis is going and what kind of recommendations you're going to get to. So does it go as far as human rights, or does it go as far as, I saw you had economic indicators, capacity building indicators. So yeah, how could we translate that, and particularly into the mechanisms here that we have? Is there a way of feeding that in very concretely to the decisions that are made here?
That actually pairs well with the question we just received online, which is, I wonder how justice is addressed and considered in the platform as a central component of peace.
Thanks a lot for that great question. And just to say, I'm very, very happy to have a supporter of the gender issues here, which I believe everybody is. And just that we have case studies specifically on gender that will also feed into this policy discourse that you mentioned before. So on that, on the policy gaps, absolutely. So what we've done so far is to run policy coherence assessments for all the 11 countries that are at the moment in the CSO, in the Climate Security Observatory. And the policy coherence assessments are really aiming to understand whether the climate security nexus is present in the selection of policies. These can be policies at national level that focus on agriculture, climate, socioeconomic risks and vulnerability, including, of course, the gender discourse, and conflict and security. So national policies, but also regional policies when appropriate. So the policy coherence assessments are already available on the CG space. It's called the website that we use for our research is all public, so you can access it for all of these 11 countries. But also the next step of analysis, the next part of the analysis that we are going to run is an institutional and governance analysis to really move forward and understand what needs to be done in the arrangement of this different institution and governance in land, water, and food system space to make sure that this change in policy happens. So to the question on the how do we make this happen? So one of the things that we really, it was really somehow surprising when we started the conversation with policymakers in the regions and the countries is that they were never really talking about the climate security, the connection between climate and conflict. When we went to the field, that was very evident. Farmers, pastoral communities, they were really clear on the nexus. So we really thought, like, why is this not happening? And the reason came from the Ministry of Environment in Senegal. I remember specifically while we were doing our workshop, he really said that, well, we don't have enough evidence. I mean, if we want to put this on the table to our ministries and in our policy decision-making processes, we need to have concrete, solid, actionable evidence. And this is what we are trying to do, to really respond to these needs. The timing of research and policies, we know that they are very different. So how can we shorten the time of the research? How can we make the data and the analysis really useful and adapted to the timing of the policies? And we started these activities and this sort of engagement at the country level and regional level, and we will also we will obviously aim to do this at global level with the entire climate security policymaking community. But this is the process. And in fact, I mean, this is also what we would like to hear from you on how we actually make this step in the Geneva space, but globally for the entire climate security space. How do we actually contribute to the policymaking, to transform the policy-making, decision-making process?
Thank you. Just to address a little bit your question in relation to gender. So in one of the CGIAR initiatives, the one on climate resilience, on building climate resilience, which is where this climate security work is mainly housed, even though it's also operating through many initiatives happening in the CGIAR. In that initiative, we have a cross-cutting theme that it's really truly cross-cutting on social equity. It goes beyond gender, but it's considering different vulnerable populations. And what is very interesting about that is that for each of the tools, analyses, research in general that we develop, we are always asking these questions in relation to social equity. And Grazia, that it's leading that work from the climate security side, has been interacting a lot with researchers in terms of making sure that these tools are very much social equity sensitive in a way. And we are also developing markers to make sure that we can track what is happening with these analyses in relation to social equity. So this is just to say that we are very serious about that, about the issue, about incorporating it in all the research that we develop, and that we would like to expand our network of work in relation to social equity, including gender. And this is an invitation to continue working on that.
I'm going to take maybe a couple questions in the room and then read a couple. We have maybe 5-10 minutes max left, so we'll group a bunch of questions and then get a group of answers. So, did you have a question?
Okay. I'm Lars Berndt. I'm working for UNICEF at the moment, and congratulations, it's really impressive. I think it's in the same vein of what has been mentioned before. I think the main issue for me is the sustainability and the integration with what exists. So my piece of advice would be really to spend a lot of time in identifying the local actors, I mean the national actors, and be, I mean, very systematic in that. I mean, of course, you have the UN, you have the NGOs, you have whatever, and really make sure that you find the right people to talk to. I mean, supposedly, you were referring to UNDRR, there would be some kind of a national platform to look into disaster risk, which should include this, not always working. But I mean, there might be any kinds of networks, and very often, I mean, it stays maybe at the regional level, it moves a bit closer, but still not at the national level. And then just take all this myriad of reports. I like that you had all these indexes there. I mean, fragility index, whatever. I mean, each organization somehow has now some kind of agenda for risk-informed development or programming or whatever you want to call it. Just dig it out and help even the UN country teams to get going on resilience. I mean, some countries have nexus working groups. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. But they should know that stuff. I mean, then it becomes relevant. And I'll stop here. Thanks a lot. Great going.
It's really the sort of leaning on each other. Not each person doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, but to really create those spaces of integration. Did you want to?
Yes, good morning everyone. My name's Liz McLeod. I'm a surgeon from Melbourne and I'm here with some colleagues from the Harvard Program for Global Surgery and Social Change. We're starting some work in this space and I really just would like to be a voice for the Pacific. As you all know, I'm sure the Pacific is highly vulnerable to climate change due to the high frequency of natural hazards, mainly geohydrological, and the vulnerabilities that are attributable to many small island states. So while we're not in a setting of overt conflict, many PICs are well entrenched in a cycle of fragility due to the frequency of exogenous shocks, and this is increasing. So the impacts of climate change are being deeply felt already in the Pacific, and we have a number of states who are looking at needing to relocate their entire populations under various heating scenarios, possibly within the decade. So my question, I guess, is around the metrics that you're using for the platform, because some of our countries are now classified as upper middle income, so they're less attractive for donors for development and humanitarian assistance. And metrics such as the Gini and GDP and also the Fragile States Index don't capture what's happening in the Pacific. There's a huge lack of data and around specific vulnerabilities of populations and also climate-related data. And I promised to do a short intervention, not like folks up the road, but just to build a case for health security, particularly in the broader sense of human security, as a critical mechanism for building resilience and the urgent need to incorporate this into disaster risk reduction and climate change policies.
Thank you. And I may actually jump on that. There are a couple of also sort of more data and regional questions that came through in the chat, so I'll maybe add those on. One is, when do you expect to populate the observatory with data related to the Arab states? And another question comes from somebody from the Union for the Mediterranean, wondering how their national partners, governments, CSOs, research partners, et cetera, could contribute to and benefit. So it seemed we have some different sort of regions, and each region has such a specific context. And so what's the best way of sort of making sure the data is up to date, but then also maybe connecting and partnering to support that? Is there maybe one more question in the room to add to the bank? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'm Rashid Jinjinwal. I'm also from the surgery side of things. I work with the Harvard Program of Global Surgery and Social Change, and I'm really grateful to first of all see an entirely female panel. This is the first time I think I've ever seen that, so I love it. Yeah. And then it's short, but I just wanted to ask, I love that you have community-based participatory research as a core for some of the data that you include. I think as a non-quant person, I love to see that. But I'm wondering, do you have plans to incorporate more like LMIC, MIC, country participants in the design team as well? Like, do you have that voice both in the data, but also in the structure of how you are planning to continue the longevity? And I think that goes to your point about sustainability, having voices in all levels of the tool. So.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think there's two ways how we are addressing or making sure that it's really used by local actors and that it stays useful. So as a starter, so something that we would need to be doing with existing platforms is to kind of create a common report to really show different users what tools are there, what are the differences, what are the similarities, and what are the different use cases for these different tools. And like that, we also reach more people, because if we include different institutions, some of them might be known in some areas or some user groups, and then we also make sure that the knowledge that we are creating is distributed. But secondly, also, as said, this is the starting point. We now launch for the first time, and we now start to run country-based and general webinars and workshops to train people. But it's not only to train and test the platform, but also to further understand what the needs are in the different countries. So as said, we will start with Kenya, Senegal, and Guatemala to run country-based workshops, where we then also will dive into the different analyses and the content of these analyses, and to really understand, are we using the right data sources? Are we answering the relevant questions? What else do we need to consider? And it's a lot of work, because basically it's case specific, it's context specific, but that's what we need to do to really make it useful.
Talk to youth groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like one more minute, Grazia, if you want to add.
Also continue on what Teresa was saying, the purpose of running the regional, national and local stakeholders workshop and consultation is exactly what you referred that what you were mentioning before. We don't want to reinvent anything. We want this to be, we want to build a common vision. And all of these reports, you see, they have 20, 30 partners, co-authors, etc. We want to really have this common vision of climate security to be a shared vision of everybody. And related to the Arab states involvement, we just recently launched on the 2nd of May the CGIAR Climate Security Hub in Cairo for the MENA region. And this year we will start our analysis for many of these countries in the Arab states. Similarly for the Mediterranean, of course, this is related. We are actually having the stakeholders engagement and consultation on the 26th of June in Rome, and it will be a hybrid event. So if you cannot be in Rome, it might be a bit too hot at that time, you can join online. And we will be discussing specifically issues of climate security issues for the Mediterranean, with the focus on mobility as well. So, on the human security and health that we mentioned before, this is precisely our approach. We don't look at those conflicts, civil wars and the big international politically related type of conflicts. We really look at the broader sense of the security, the human security perspective. So that's certainly something that we are trying to work more as we move forward, as well as including and integrating other countries that are not the usual suspects in terms of climate and conflict fragility. So we are starting with these 11 countries, but we are expanding to another 16 in another in the next 3 years, and up until 2030, who knows? We might even go beyond before the 2030. So yes, we will do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you three for fielding our talk. And as we transition in a minute, we can switch back to the normal mic away from this fancy ceiling mic. But as we do that, I want to invite you for one more moment of sort of silent reflection, which is just to really think, what is my next step leaving today? What is my next, am I going to email a colleague about this? Am I going to go spend block 45 minutes on the calendar to wander around with the tool online? I just want to, as we invite our last speaker up and we switch the mics up, please take 1 minute to just reflect. What is your next concrete action leaving here today regarding this launch? I really have the pleasure of introducing our final contributor, who's here to offer some closing remarks and really ground it in the Geneva ecosystem, as I know a couple of folks brought up. So here from UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, we have Andrew Harper. He is a special advisor to the High Commissioner for Climate Action and is responsible for providing strategic guidance, oversight, and expertise to shape UNHCR's response to the climate emergency. So I'm going to hand you the microphone over to you.
Thanks, Annika. So I'll wrap this up within 5 minutes so that we can observe the parameters of today's session. The closing remarks are basically going to be a little bit of a summary of what we've gone through, but also what I've seen as the value added of CGIAR and what the observatory can provide. And I think one of the key elements is the slogan, which is actionable evidence. And one of the reasons that this is so important is that there's been so much talk, so many strategies, so many policies, and they've either been very much, as has been discussed, as Adam mentioned before, individual pieces of work, looking at one particularly thematic area, but it hasn't actually linked everything up. And the only thing which I'd be sort of saying in terms of focused climate security, we've got to be looking at the human security and what influences that human security. Lars mentioned, well, he didn't mention it, but I'll say education. We're talking about health, we're talking about food security, we're talking about governance. And the only way which you can get a comprehensive overview of human security is if you're much more sophisticated in your analysis. And this is what this offers. And why I can say so sort of categorically why it provides this opportunity is because we've used it. And there was also a question in terms of how do we move evidence into action. Well, one of those big elements is to ensure the absorption by policymakers and decision makers into action on the ground. And this is why it was so good to see Ambassador Jamal here, because this is a demonstration that we're not just talking about analysis, we're not just talking about data. This is actually being input into a very important and strategic document, which is a regional adaptation plan for the IGAD region. And just as climate respects no boundaries, it's no use just having adaptation plans which just deal with a country. You have to have regional approaches, and those regional approaches then have to deal with continental responses and then have to deal with global strategies when it comes down to it. So what I would also be saying is that, if I've got a word of advice as well, let's also see how we can expand it. And so look at not only the evidence, but also how do we include best practices? How do we include projects? Because that's something which Ambassador Jamal is driving at the moment for the IGAD region. We've got the evidence, increasingly so. What we need to do is stop the excuses of the lack of action. And those excuses will be leading up to COP. And there'll be lots of people there sort of saying, I would like to do more, but we can't do more because we don't have the projects and we don't have the evidence. What we've got here is an example of basically filling those gaps. So in the last minute, some of the key points that I've got from the presentation, we have to be much more sophisticated in our approach. We have to be much more collaborative. We have to agree on common outcomes. We have to look at the consolidation of data. And I'd almost be sort of driving for how do we have real-time data inputs? There was also a very good reference in terms of how do we involve local communities. That's not just that, you just can't say local communities and expect that the statistical officers or youth groups have got the capacity or the resources to be involved. You have to invest in them. So it's very good for us to be sort of saying in Geneva or New York, local capacity building, but then when you actually go to the field and you go to the Ministry of Environment or you go to youth groups, they say, well, that's very good, but we've got no money, we've got no chairs, we've got no communication. So let's talk less and do more, and based on the evidence that this observatory can provide. Again, no excuses, pathway to action, complex processes. Another thing is not just the EGAD process that is using the data. We're now using, and this is how we can continually calibrate the data and information we've got here. So UNHCR is developing, in support of the regions as well, our own climate adaptation plans. And so what we're doing is just adding the locations of our refugee and IDP, not ours, refugee and IDP locations overlaid with the data that you've got. And so it just works by collaboration. It doesn't work if you try and do things by yourself. So apart from that, thank you, congratulations for everything that you've done. I've got so much confidence that this is just going to be an anchor for how we move forward to, as you were saying, to make actionable evidence and turn evidence into action. So on that note, thank you, and it's closed.
Thank you so much. It really is, I want to encourage all of you, the most practical way to start a collaboration today is to introduce yourself to somebody that you haven't met, ask for their email address, and plan a coffee. That's where collaboration really starts. Before I hand over to Ana Maria, who will just make one sort of final closing comment after our closing speaker, I just want to say again a thank you to the GCSP, to UNU, Center for Policy Research, and also to CGIAR. So over to you, Ana Maria.
Thank you very much, Anika, and I'll be very brief, 1 minute, as you told me to. So this is very exciting, and I'm so pleased to see that people are interested about this. And I think that this is the right way to start this. Just want to say a few words about some things that are very relevant for us, and the CGIAR, the moment where we are right now, we take very seriously. So we talk about sustainability, really, really important. We talk about integration, really, really important. We talk about demand-driven approaches. And this is what, for you that you are not very close to the CGIAR, we're going through a huge reform in which we are working in a better way together. The different centers, research centers that are part of the CGIAR, we are really aiming to be more coordinated. And I think that this comes from 50 years of understanding that we really need to change the way that we work with partners. And very, very much at the heart of that is how we are responding to demands. Teresa had a lot of pressure in terms of delivering on this Climate Security Observatory, and it took time to start because we were really seriously listening to partners, understanding demand, what is needed, what are the gaps, how do we go about it? And then in terms of ownership, at some point when I said to my team, you know, I'm not going to start developing a tool if we don't know who is going to host this tool. It's not the CGIAR. I don't want to see more tools that are hosted by either Biodiversity International, CIAD, all the CGIAR centers, because it does not work. So this is just to tell you that we are really up to the challenge of making sure that these things are very much demand-driven, that these things are housed in the places that they should be so that there's sustainability over time, and that we are ready to listen to you. And these events are very important for us because this is the way that we understand better where are the gaps, where are the demands, and then operate and act upon that understanding of what is missing and what from the research side, from the generation of evidence, we can do to contribute so that you can make your work better. So with that, let me thank everybody, our hosts. It is wonderful to be here. This is not the end, by no ways. This is the beginning of a journey that today was a very, very important milestone, but we are going to continue doing this to make sure that this is really fit for purpose and that we are seeing those examples happening on the ground in terms of policies being implemented and going all the way into reaching the vulnerable groups that we would like to reach. So thank you very much for your time being here, and let's keep in touch. Thank you.
We met by email a year ago. I had by now, I have spent